I'm Commander Exesius, and today we're going to look at getting started with player versus player combat. This will be a general purpose guide talking about the various aspects of PvP rather than a specific ship or combat strategy guide. We'll look at what ships to start with, what engineers you'll need, credits, systems and player groups, so you can get started with one of the best parts of Elite. Let's start by setting some expectations. Early PvP is very difficult, and if you equate fun with winning engagements, these early fights will be anything but. Going in with a desire to learn, to better understand outfitting and engineering, and growing your combat skills is very important. The ability to dispatch elite level NPCs is very different when compared to defeating a human opponent. To start, you're going to need a fairly good bank balance, something in the order of 20 or more rebuys for the ship you'll choose to start with. A rough baseline minimum of 100 million credits is a decent starting point. As for ships, you'll want to start with small or medium class ships, with the Viper or Vulture being excellent small class, and the Federal Assault ship, Chieftain, or possibly the Fer de Lance working well for medium class. I highly suggest avoiding the large ships, as not only are they difficult to fly given their size, but their far higher rebuy makes them extremely expensive for your early engagements. One of the near requirements of PvP is an engineered ship, and while you don't need every engineer, you're going to need several of the key ones. These would be Li Chung and Didi Vaderman for shields and shield boosters, and Celine Jean for armor and hull reinforcements. The Dweller, Felicity Farseer, and Heratani will be necessary for your core modules, and while it's great to have Professor Palin for Grade 5 dirty drives, you can get by with Grade 3 from Felicity. Todd McQuinn is rather easy and important, as you'll likely be using railguns, and Bill Turner is extremely useful so you can engineer plasma accelerators. Virtually all the engineers are useful and ultimately important, but you don't have to wait for them all to be unlocked to get started. One of the most important things is finding the right players to spar with. Depending on the player and group, you can even set up unengineered fights. There are many player groups who engage in PvP, with the Galactic Combat Initiative Discord hosting a number of skilled pilots. While level 11, the player group I fly with isn't specifically PvP focused, we do have a number of players and mentors available for fights. Community goal systems are another great place to find opponents. However, this will likely be much higher level combat with fewer stipulations for the fight. You should always be prepared to be destroyed and pay your rebuy. However, many times you can set terms with an opponent before the fight begins. Often you can agree to 20% hull, stowing weapons, charging for jump, or messaging GG to concede the fight, again with the understanding that things happen and you still may be destroyed. There are a few pieces of etiquette to be aware of before beginning an engagement. First and foremost is to ensure that you have report crimes against me set to off so that your opponent will not become wanted when firing upon you. Once the terms of the fight are established, you'll want to face your opponent a few kilometers away, and when you begin, fly past each other waiting to open fire until you've passed. This prevents easy, dirty shots at the outset. If you're using a ship launch fighter, and as a beginner you likely shouldn't be, wait to order them to attack until you've passed your target. While we won't discuss combat tactics here, there are a few things to mention, as you'll likely come up against many different combat styles. Reverse-ski, or flying backwards while firing at your target, is generally frowned upon and does little to build skill. You'll want to focus on flying evasively, flying in a straight line as little as possible. Jousting is very common, where you'll want to anticipate your target's location before firing. You'll want to practice with flight assist off as much as possible, although using FA off toggling as you learn works well. It's important to stay calm and not become emotional during your fight. Remember that this is a game after all. Nothing is more important than seat time, and as I said in the beginning, if you equate fun with defeating your opponent, you'll likely be very disappointed with your early fights. Skilled human commanders are dramatically more difficult than even the hardest NPCs. There are two general types of ship builds: biweave hull tanks and shield tanks. Each build type offers many different options, and rather than go into detailed specifics here, we'll focus on that in later videos in the series. For now, let's look at some general concepts for each build type. I'll include several builds in the description below. Starting with biweave hull tanks, we'll want, you guessed it, biweave shield generator, generally of the largest size possible. This will run a thermal blueprint with fast charge experimental and will possibly be paired with resistance augmented shield boosters. The goal is as fast a regeneration as possible, as the shield acts as a buffer for your hull against weapons such as missiles and super penetrator experimentals. For your armor, you'll want to run reactive surface composites with the heavy duty blueprint and deep plate experimental. In your optional slots, you'll want a single module reinforcement of the largest size possible, filling remaining slots with heavy duty deep plate hull reinforcements. You'll want a single small thermal hull reinforcement to ensure balanced resistances. Shield tanks are a bit more complex, as they generally require the use of shield cell banks, making them far more difficult to use. Here you can go with the largest A-rated generator possible, with prismatic being preferable if available, with reinforced blueprint. You'll then use one or more shield cell banks, generally with a matching heatsink for each. Depending on the ship and build, you can double bank, with the risk of taking heat damage rather high. Alternatively, you can use one class lower generator with a large cell bank which provides for more overall shield strength, however making you more susceptible to cascade effect. In all cases, you'll fill any remaining utility slots with A-rated shield boosters with a mix of heavy-duty and thermal blueprints to ensure balanced resistances. As it can be very difficult to manage your cell banks, which must be deployed before your shields drop, shield tanks are generally not recommended for beginner PvP pilots. For your weapons, there are many choices for modules, blueprints, and experimental effects based on your fighting style, ship, and build. It's smart to run a general purpose build, as you'll likely not know what you're going to encounter. Presently, the weapon meta is plasma accelerators and railguns. With plasma accelerators doing absolute damage, that is ignoring resistances, their high damage output is advantageous. They are difficult weapons to learn, so practice against NPCs is highly suggested. You'll want to use the efficient blueprint with either target lock breaker or dispersal. While focused can make it far easier to land shots, the additional damage offered by efficient and the dramatically lower power and distributor draw and thermal load is significant. Learning to land efficient shots from the outset will pay dividends down the line. The most important aspect of PvP is to engage in as many fights as possible, as nothing replaces seat time. Fighting as many commanders and as many different ships with as many different builds is a fantastic way to learn what styles and builds you'd like to emulate. Working with mentors, asking other skilled pilots for help is also key. Yes, there are some toxic members of the community, but by and large you'll find many skilled pilots who are more than willing to help you get your wings. In future videos, we'll take more detailed looks at specific ships, defenses, weapons, and combat tactics than is possible in this beginner's guide. If you enjoy combat, as it is one of the areas where Elite shines the brightest, engaging in PvP can be extremely rewarding and offer many hours of content. For players who feel they've seen and done much of what Elite has to offer, this can be gameplay that keeps them engaged for many hours. Once again, this has been Commander Exesius, reminding you to fly dangerously, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that look at PvP combat, I hope you'll check out my other content, and that you'll join me for my weekly live streams, Tutorial Tuesdays, and the Creators Roundtable each Friday, and that you'll consider supporting my efforts via Patreon.